Well, everybody, I have to say it's been a rough year for the Ukraine cinematic universe. It looked like we were starting out strong. We had Kursk Offensive, which had a great opening night, but the budget was just too high. They sunk too many resources in making the film, and it turned out to be a flop. They tried to keep it in theaters a couple months longer than they probably should have, and that just ran up the loss even more, and it was kind of a disaster. We had probably maybe the single biggest disaster in terms of return on investment so far, where we had the attempted Friends reboot starring Zelensky, Macron, Starmer, Mertz, and Tusk. And audiences said that that was the cringiest thing that they had ever seen, and the premiere episode got the lowest ratings of any preview episode of a major sitcom series in history. We even tried to branch out a bit into like IRL streaming, like internet drama, some internet blood sports. We had the whole Fight Me IRL arc where they were trying to set up the fight between Zelensky and Putin in Istanbul. Trump came in and tried to cut a promo, and like once again it just didn't really go anywhere. There weren't enough super chats to make up for it. But it looks like we got a hit. It looks like we have a movie that's actually making money for once. And that film is called Operation Spider's Web. And that's not me like making fun of it and giving it like a Ukraine cinematic universe name. That's literally what it's called. And of all the things that have happened in this war, this might actually be the most cinematic. Even more so than the Spring Offensive with its multiple trailers, this really reminds me more of a movie than just about anything else that's happened. I mean, like, let's set the stage. We have the plucky underdog rebels up against the big evil empire. The rebels use their ingenuity and resilience and the limited resources at their disposal to win an asymmetric battle, to go up against like I said, the evil empire, like the empire from Star Wars. And because of their ignorance, arrogance, and incompetence, they wind up taking a massive L. And I mean, you got all kinds of, like, this thing was apparently planned for 18 months. That is one hell of a training montage that they can put in. We can have like maybe some comedic scenes where they're setting up these trucks all throughout Russia. This is a hit. And I would be absolutely shocked, like just being serious, if this did not get a film adaptation. I could even see this getting a film adaptation relatively soon before the war is over, but certainly at some point. So anyways, now that introduction's out of the way, let's talk about Operation Spider's Web, which is a operation that Ukraine has carried out all over Russia, actually. Let me see if there's a map here. Yeah, they managed to hit a pretty wide range of bases. This is at least one. This is the Center for Strategic and International Studies map. So as you can see, they are able to hit some relatively close to Ukraine, but also in Siberia and in Murmansk. So that's quite a ways away. So let's see what they have to say about this. We'll go through this BBC article. It was an attack of astonishing ingenuity, unprecedented and broad, and 18 months in the making. On June 1st, more than 100 Ukrainian drones struck air bases deep inside Russia, targeting nuclear-capable long-range bombers. Okay, so I actually did do some research into this. So much as with the United States, Russia is reliant on strategic bombers that were mostly built during the 1950s and 1960s that they've just periodically modernized. The Russians' main bomber, the Tu-95, doesn't even have jets. It's a turboprop aircraft. Much as with the B-52s, they just periodically upgrade them, and they have some newer bombers, but there hasn't really been an impetus to really go out and build something more modern. I think they encountered kind of the same issues that the U.S. had when they tried to make the Rockwell or the B-2. Was there really a need for like a super expensive stealth bomber in the current day and age? Or can you just give it really long range cruise or ballistic missiles and stealth won't even be necessary? Like I think the range on the some of the missiles that the Tu-95s were firing could have been fired from like the Caspian Sea and hit Ukraine. So at that point, like it doesn't really matter. Its job is it's not so much the aircraft itself; it's what it's carrying. The missiles have continuously gotten better, longer range, more accurate, bigger explosions. And so a plane from the 1950s that's sturdy, that's stable, that you know how it works, that's relatively inexpensive to operate, is just as useful and just as usable as some super advanced modern stealth bomber that breaks down every other week. So Russia has been relying on this small number of bombers that they built during the 1950s and 60s and upgraded, and there's also a couple newer ones, but it didn't result in very many. That being the Tu-160. So my understanding is the Russian strategic bomber fleet prior to this operation was approximately 120 operational aircraft. And as can be seen, these tended to be operated far beyond the front lines because, like I said, the range on the cruise missiles these things carry is just so long. They don't really need to be particularly close to the front line. So Russia's main long-range cruise missiles, the KH-101 among others, are, I believe, exclusively launched from heavy bombers. Now, the Russians have other weapons. They have other cruise missiles. They have other ballistic missiles. They have other lighter cruise missiles that are launched from multi-role aircraft. But I did look it up, and to be fair to Ukraine, to the best of my understanding, most of the long-range strategic cruise missiles, these are the ones that hit military bases, that hit airports, that hit infrastructure in Ukraine, are launched by heavy bombers. So I guess what the logic was is okay, the Russians have a very limited number of these. They don't have an ability to really build any more in the future or in the foreseeable future, unlike some other things that they're building a lot of. So why don't we take a risk? We'll try to go in and blow up some of these bombers, and that should limit their ability to launch these long range cruise missiles at us. So I'm going to have to say, like, while this does not change the overall course of the war, as far as like crazy cinematic style movie schemes goes, this one at least makes a little bit of sense to me. They actually like picked a target that was having an impact on the war that they could potentially destroy enough to actually make a difference in that one respect. And it seems like they executed it in a fairly competent manner. So I'll give them credit for once. The cinematic 4D chess plan seems to have actually worked out pretty well. So let's go back to this. So what wound up happening is the Ukrainians snuck hundreds of drones in deep inside of Russia. We aren't entirely sure how they did this, but apparently they snuck over the like Belarusian border um, with trucks full of drones or something like that, and they set them up in strategic places all over Russia, and they just en masse went in and attacked all of these airfields at once. Okay, so in photos released shortly after the attack, the head of security service of Ukraine can be seen looking at a satellite map of airfields in which the bases of the locations listed by Russia are clearly identifiable. Yeah, so they went in and destroyed them. Yeah, drones were first smuggled into Russia, then placed inside wooden cabins mounted on the back of trucks and concealed below remotely operated detached roofs. So the drones flew out of there. They went and attacked the airfields. So according to Ukrainian numbers, which I would take with a massive salt mine, for this attack, they were able to destroy, that is completely write off, 13 strategic bombers and hit a total of 41. So theoretically, they may have knocked out a third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet for at least a little while. Now, it looks like maybe about 10% of it was permanently destroyed. Whenever you hear damaged, it's very difficult. That could range from one of the engines completely got blown out and they're going to have to like replace the wing of the plane to shrapnel broke a couple windows and you'll have to swap that out. Damage can mean basically anything. Much like disabled, like a tank can become disabled if part of its track comes off and that's the only repair it needs. It's this, it says disabled as if it got hit by an artillery round. It's kind of an ambiguous term, but that does seem to have actually done some real damage. Now, the thing I'm not really sure about is how many bombers Russia uses at any one time. My understanding is their strategic bombers can carry something like 16 long-range cruise missiles at once. So I'm not sure if they were using like 40 a day or 20 a day or something like that. Someone can maybe post in the comments down below. I'm sure that they have maintenance time. The point being is I'm not sure if this does shrink the total number of bombers enough that it will dramatically reduce Russia's ability to fire cruise missiles. Because if they were only using 10 planes a day and just launching 16 missiles from each of them, then this will suck, but it won't necessarily cripple their abilities. That's also to say that these are not the planes that are launching glide bombs or shorter range cruise missiles. So we don't know what the effect is, but I will just at least say that this was a clever operation. And they actually like hit something that was not of just symbolic importance for once. So I will give them credit for this. Now, I have seen some of the pro-Russia people who are crying crocodile tears by saying, but this is part of the nuclear triad. You can't attack strategic bombers. Those bombers are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, and because of that, you aren't allowed to attack them. Because if you threaten Russia's nuclear triad, then that's existential. It's get into all that stuff. I do get the argument if Ukraine attacks the warning radars for intercontinental ballistic missiles. I do get that argument, but the argument that like we can't it's so beyond the pale for Ukraine to attack inside Russia these bombers that are actively firing missiles at them is it's just kind of goofy. It's kind of crocodile tears. Now, the thing we've talked about in the past is what is really meant in a lot of the cases when we hear people complain about attacks inside Russia is not so much the attack itself, but what it indicates. So there's the question, and I think this is a very legitimate one. Was the CIA involved in this operation? Was MI6? Was various three-letter Western intelligence agencies involved with this? I think the answer is like 90% yes. Even if they weren't directly involved, we're supposed to believe that for like 18 months they were planning this and none of the probably tens of thousands of Western intelligence agents in Ukraine knew about this. I just find that very hard to believe. I'm actually not really sure at the moment what Trump's saying. I think he said that he didn't know about it, or maybe he didn't. I don't know. But I'm sure there's going to be some kind of denials about it one way or another. So then that's the big question. Is it's not so much that Ukraine attacked Russia. It's the idea that the CIA planned this out, was not to say that the Ukrainians weren't the leading force, but they provided them with like satellite data, all kinds of resources, training, stuff like that. And we have the scenario where the U.S. is directly involved with teams of Ukrainians infiltrating Russia and attacking its strategic nuclear forces. So from that perspective, I think what the argument is because the U.S. was allegedly, and let's be honest, involved in this attack, and the attack was on strategic nuclear assets, it basically means the United States was attempting to damage Russia's nuclear capabilities. So I don't know. You can believe that or you cannot believe that. I do kind of get the argument. At the same time, I do find the Russians often have crocodile tears about a lot of this. And I do get their point that it's not fair that Ukraine can strike inside of Russia, whereas Russia can't strike inside of Poland or Romania or any of the places that are that store the weapons for Ukraine and then immediately ship them across the border. But that's just kind of war, guys. You just are going to kind of have to learn to live with it. Now, the other thing is, and here's the bigger question beyond just like how the Ukrainians were able to pull this off. What the hell was Russian intelligence doing? What were the security forces doing? What was Russian military aviation doing? How was this even able to happen? Why were all these bombers just lying out in the open? Now, it's not practical, obviously, to build concrete bunkers for everything, but you can't tell me they couldn't put up some drone netting or, I don't know, put them in a metal shed or something. They just had all their expensive, limited number strategic bombers just kind of lying out there in an environment where Ukraine's repeatedly shown it's able to do attacks deep inside Russia. Now, unlike something with the oil refineries where the damage is not very big and can be repaired, aircraft are complex, delicate, expensive instruments. And it's a lot easier to destroy or severely damage one than it is a lot of the things that the Ukrainians normally attack. But no, it's absolutely embarrassing and humiliating that Russia didn't figure out that this was happening, that they didn't stop it, that they didn't have countermeasures in place for something like this to happen, that they couldn't really respond to it. It's just, to me, it's kind of very hard to believe. I'm not saying there's a conspiracy or Russia let it happen, but this is profoundly embarrassing. That they were that something like this could happen at this stage in the war when we've had this so many like Ukrainian attacks behind lines with drones, and it's just that this level of negligence could occur. And I think what this signals, and we'll kind of transition to kind of the secondary aspect of this, is there is some growing criticism of Putin within Russia. Now, Russia's not unstable or anything. Putin is very firmly in control, but Putin is increasingly coming under political pressure. Now, the thing I think people in the West don't get is Putin is probably like one of the most moderate figures in Russian politics. You can say what you will about him. He will at least try to do a diplomatic solution. He will at least try to do something in accordance with how he understands international law, tries to do something to keep the Chinese and Brazilians and stuff on side. You can agree or disagree with it, but the interpretation of Putin in a lot of Russia is that he's a lawyer, he's obsessed with the law, he's obsessed with doing things in this procedural way, he's too civilized, he's too polite, he won't let the army just win the war, and he's dragging this thing out by his indecisiveness, by his like attempts to try to butter Trump up, to try to keep the Brazilians on side. And a lot of people, both within his party, in the opposition parties, and just in Russian society, are increasingly going, look, stuff like this keeps happening. Like it's we get it, we're winning the war. It's a long haul. We're fighting all of NATO at once. But a lot of people are just seeing this and like, how is this still happening 3 years into the war? We went and we had this big conference in Istanbul and we talked to Trump like 6 or 7 times on the phone, and Ukraine just launches an attack like this. And Putin's coming under a lot of criticism for it. Now, obviously, it's not going to result in his government being overthrown or anything, but he is going to come under, I think, more and more political pressure as time goes on to boost the tempo, to become a little more casualty tolerant, maybe to start using some of those Arezhniks that they've been building, maybe to go after targets that they didn't go after before, maybe to upgrade this from a special military operation to whatever the next phase is on the level of escalation. And honestly, that is probably what the Ukrainians are counting on. You see, when we look at this war, you have to understand that from a diplomatic perspective, there are basically three sides to this. And sometimes the Ukrainians are on the Russian side in terms of in terms of what they want to have happen, and sometimes they're on the American side in terms of what they want to have happen. Like they are with the Russians and being largely against the ceasefire, wanting the war to continue and wanting escalation. I've said this and I still believe firmly that what Ukraine is attempting to do is to cause some sort of escalation to get America directly involved, because that is literally the only way I think that they can have any chance of winning at this point in time. I don't think the US entering would lead them to win for a number of different reasons. If for no other reason than I don't think Trump has any desire to uh, bring in conscription and deploy the entire US army to go fight in Ukraine. And even if he wanted to, it's not like they have the ammunition for it. And we also have China and Iran and all this, and Israel and all this other crazy stuff happening. But I think the Ukrainians, and to be fair, I can kind of see why, I think, okay, we're screwed. The Europeans are incompetent. They don't have strong militaries. They don't have a strong military industrial complex. They aren't going to be able to ultimately help us. So what we need to do is to try to escalate the situation to the point where the Americans feel obligated to come in, and either start deploying U.S. troops or provide us with air cover and make a no-fly zone, or maybe even threaten to use nuclear weapons against Russia unless Russia steps down. That is what I think Ukraine is betting on, and that's what I think their plan is at the moment. And to be honest, as far as like moves they have, is it dangerous? Yes. Is it an unnecessary contribution towards a possible nuclear war? Yes. But it is really the only card they have left to play, that has a non 0% chance of succeeding. Now, it's extremely dangerous, and as time goes on, they'll get more and more desperate. Who knows what kind of things they'll eventually start turning to? I mean, they've done political assassinations. Maybe they'll just start blowing up schools and stuff. Maybe we'll just start getting Crocus City Hall attacks all the time, trying to really provoke Russia into just kind of freaking out and just going full scorched earth. Because if you look at the number of civilian casualties in Ukraine, it's been like 12 or 13,000, which is very, very low for high intensity warfare with this much strategic bombing. So they might be just trying to get Russia to stop trying to minimize civilian casualties. But it remains to be seen. So, rare actual Ukrainian W, at least in my humble opinion. Now, Russia is going to respond probably with overwhelming force, and it's not going to wind up being a net Ukrainian win. But as far as propaganda like attacks go, this one I think actually was pretty decent. And it might actually make a good film someday. So, that's all I have to say. God bless, and I'll talk to you all again real soon.